Once upon a time, not in fairy tales or distant lands, but here in America, there lived young men with a dream so big, the sky could barely hold it. They dreamed of flying, but the world they lived in had built fences on the ground and ceilings in the sky. The color of their skin was seen as a weight too heavy for wings. The military said they weren't smart enough. Commanders said they weren't brave enough. The country, in silence, said they weren't worth the risk. And so, before a single red-tail soared, a war had already begun. In city basements, behind typewriters, the first shots were fired. With ink, black newspapers like the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender filled their pages with fire. They didn't beg for permission. They demanded justice. "Let us fly," they wrote. "Give us wings, or admit the lie in freedom." In courtrooms and corridors, the NAACP turned those headlines into hard pressure. They wrote letters, filed lawsuits, walked the marble steps of Congress with shoulders squared and eyes fixed forward. They didn't ask America to give its word. They asked it to keep it. And then, one day in 1941, something extraordinary happened. A woman stepped out of a government car on a dusty airstrip in Alabama. She was the First Lady of the United States. Her name was Eleanor Roosevelt. She didn't come with speeches. She came to meet a pilot. His name was Charles Chief Anderson. She climbed into the back seat of his rickety training plane. He took her hand, nodded once, and together they rose. Above the red clay fields and rusted hangars, they flew in silence. And when they landed, she turned to the men watching, folded her gloves, and said simply, "These boys can fly." The War Department, caught between headlines, lawsuits, and the First Lady herself, reluctantly gave in. They called it an experiment, a test. They built a training field at Tuskegee, Alabama, stocked it with second-hand planes, suspicious instructors, and a pile of quiet hopes they expected to crush. But something else happened. The men who arrived weren't just students. They were scholars, mechanics, sons of sharecroppers and doctors, jazz musicians and math prodigies. They trained harder, flew longer, studied deeper. They had been told for generations that they could never rise. So they chose to fly instead. From that red dirt and resistance, a new name was born, one the world would never forget: the Red Tails. But before they painted the skies with courage, before they escorted bombers across the war-torn fields of Europe, before they were legends, they were a dream, lifted by typewriters, lawsuits, a pilot named Chief, and a First Lady who chose to believe. And this is their story. Tuskegee, Alabama, 1941. As with their ancestors before them, America once again misjudged its sons. They didn't merely underestimate the abilities of foundational Black Americans. No, underestimation suggests ignorance. But many of those who stood in the way weren't ignorant. They were descendants of those who had already seen our strength. They had seen the builders, the warriors, the scholars, the creators, and deep down, they remembered. The fear wasn't that we couldn't rise. It was that we always did. So they tried to shut the door to the sky. But the dream of flight had already taken root. Not the fantasy of fairy tales, but a real and grounded hope to rise above. The world was at war. Explosions shook Europe and North Africa. Soldiers bled across oceans. By 1943, the so-called experiment had become a force. The 332nd Fighter Group wasn't a footnote in the war. It was black brilliance stitched into every uniform, carried at 10,000 feet. They flew as if they were building something far bigger than glory. They started in P-40 Warhawks, planes that were outdated before the ink on their assignment orders dried, but they made them sing. Then came the P-47 Thunderbolts, thicker, stronger, faster, better suited for the men who had learned to fly through resistance itself. And then, the P-51 Mustang, the crown jewel, the machine that turned mortal pilots into legends. It moved like a whisper and struck like thunder. It cut the clouds like a blade, and in their hands, it became something sacred. They didn't just fly the Mustang. They claimed it. They painted its tail red. That red tail wasn't decoration. It was a flare sent across the sky to every eye watching, ally or enemy. And with every mission, the Red Tails flew deeper into legend. Their mission wasn't to chase dogfights. It wasn't to tally kills or steal headlines. To fly beside bombers, to guard them from German fighters hungry for easy kills, to shield the payloads that might end the war. They flew into flak storms, watched each other's backs with a discipline so tight it looked choreographed. 6 planes, 12, 30, moving as one. Not a swarm, a statement. They flew with purpose, and history would never be the same. They shot down over 100 enemy aircraft, including the world's first operational jet-powered fighters, the Me-262s, the Messerschmitt. By the spring of 1945, they had flown hundreds of missions, escorted thousands of bombers, and returned home with a record that silenced doubt. But the skies had grown darker, stranger. Germany, pressed into desperation, had unleashed a machine that didn't belong to the era. But not even the future could outrun the Red Tails. The 332nd in formation, guiding the lumbering bombers across enemy terrain. Then, the radio crackled. Contact. Enemy fighters on the move, but among them, a jet. It darted across the sky, climbing, twisting, veering into the rear of the formation. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown saw it first. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for backup. He pulled away from formation and gave chase. The Me-262 was designed to be untouchable. Brown's P-51 Mustang, even in full throttle, should never have caught it. But what engineers hadn't calculated was will. Roscoe dropped altitude. He used the dive to build speed, let the G-forces press into his chest, and he stayed with the jet. Second by second, inch by inch, the impossible began to close. Then, he fired. 6 Browning .50 caliber machine guns roared to life. Tracer rounds tore across the sky. The Me-262 burst into flame. Its wreckage spun through the clouds, and the sky, silent for a moment, carried a truth that would echo for generations. The future had met its match. Roscoe didn't celebrate. He didn't break formation for a victory roll. He rejoined the Escort because the mission wasn't about ego. It was about protection. It was about the bombers. The headlines would come later. The recognition would come much, much later. But in that moment, all that mattered was this. A black pilot from Tuskegee had taken down Nazi Germany's most advanced weapon. Not because he was lucky, not because he was helped, but because he was better. And he had proved it with a red tail and a clear shot. The jet went down, but the legacy soared. And high above enemy lines, the Red Tails wrote another line into the history they were never supposed to touch. But touch it they did. They had served with honor. They had become the legends the country never planned for and couldn't erase. They didn't need applause to know they had changed the sky. They had done something far greater. They had changed the story beneath it. Today, you can see red tails painted on restored P-51 Mustangs in museums. You can read their names in textbooks, watch their stories in documentaries, and hear their voices in oral histories passed down like scripture. But the red tails were never just history. They were, and are, a lesson that no system, no assumption, no prejudice is stronger than discipline, unity, and purpose. That no flight is impossible when the reason to rise outweighs the world's weight to hold you down. They flew for a country that wasn't ready for them. But because they flew, their descendants, their people, their culture, are also rulers of the sky. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share this story so more people know who really guarded the skies. Hit that like and subscribe as we speak their names. Roscoe Brown, Benjamin O. Davis Jr., Charles McGee, and every pilot who carried the weight of a nation with a red tail behind him. The red tails didn't just fly. They carved open a sky once closed to them. Now it's on us to keep it open, carry their legacy forward, and know we conquered the sky.